You started something. Maybe it was a new routine, a business idea you've been sitting on for 2 years, a decision to stop drinking so much or to finally get serious about your health. Or maybe it wasn't even that dramatic. Maybe you just decided quietly to stop living the way you were living. And for a while it worked. You felt different, cleaner somehow, like something had genuinely shifted. Then, without any clear explanation, you stopped. Not because something went wrong. Not because it got too hard in any obvious way. You just drifted back. Returned to the exact patterns you were trying to leave. And the part that's hardest to sit with, you watched yourself do it. You were aware of it happening in real time. And you still couldn't stop it. So the question isn't whether you have discipline, or whether you want it badly enough. The question is why something in you, specifically, deliberately, almost intelligently, works against the things you actually want. And the answer is stranger than most men expect. There's a specific kind of man this shows up in most clearly. He's intelligent enough to see his patterns. Self-aware enough to know exactly what he should be doing. Capable enough that people around him have always assumed he'd figure it out eventually. And that combination becomes its own quiet prison. Because the man who is smart, self-aware, and perpetually not quite there, he still gets to live inside the story of potential. He hasn't failed. He just hasn't fully committed yet. There's always a better version of him coming. Just around the corner. Just after the next reset. That story is seductive. It's also a way of never being held accountable to the life you're actually living. And what's worth understanding is why that story survives every attempt to leave it. Why, even when you can see the pattern clearly, you still can't seem to escape it. That's not a discipline problem. That's a protection mechanism. There's a concept in psychology called the homeostatic impulse. Your brain, like your body, is wired to return to its baseline. Disrupt your body temperature, your blood pressure, your sleep, and your biology will quietly work to restore equilibrium. It doesn't evaluate whether the baseline is healthy. It doesn't care if the baseline is making you miserable. It simply defends what it knows. Your psychology operates on the same principle. The identity you've built, even if it's painful, even if it's quietly making you miserable, is familiar. And familiar to the nervous system registers as safe. Not good. Not healthy. Safe. Change, even genuinely good change, registers as disruption. And your mind responds to disruption the way it responds to any perceived threat. Not consciously. Not maliciously. But systematically. It makes you forget. It makes you lose interest. It generates fatigue at precisely the wrong moment. It makes the old way feel reasonable again even when part of you knows it isn't. And here's what most frameworks completely miss. The mind isn't simply resisting change. It's making a calculation. It has looked at what you're moving toward, assessed what that would cost, and decided the risk isn't worth it. It's not irrational. It's just working with old information. Which brings up a question most men never think to ask. Not, what would I gain if I succeeded? You've thought about that endlessly. That's why you kept starting. The more useful question is, what would I lose? Because every identity shift carries invisible costs. And your unconscious mind has been accounting for those costs from the beginning. If you get serious about your health and actually change your body, you might lose the version of yourself who bonds with other men over not caring. The guy who's easy to be around because his choices don't implicitly challenge anyone else's. If you build real success, financially, creatively, professionally, you might lose the story that the circumstances were against you. And that story, however painful, has been protecting you from a more unsettling question. What if you had the ability all along, and the only thing standing between you and the life you wanted was you? If you become more emotionally available, more honest, more present, you might lose the version of yourself who gets to stay behind the glass. who watches his own life without fully being inside it, who can't be truly hurt because he was never truly known. Progress doesn't just change your habits. It changes who you are. And your mind is designed to protect who you are. This is also where most men assume the enemy is external. The wrong job. The unsupportive partner. The city that never quite fit. The circumstances that kept showing up at the wrong time. And sometimes those things are real obstacles. But a lot of men discover, usually only after removing them, that the problem didn't leave with them. The new city feels the same after 6 months. The new relationship carries the same emotional distance. The new job brings the same hollow feeling on Sunday evenings, the same low-grade dread that arrives before the week does. The obstacle moved inside, because it was always inside. What's less obvious is how the mind conceals this, how it generates resistance in the language of reason. Here's what it looks like on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. You've committed to something. You're doing the work. And then, somewhere around week 3 or 4, a thought arrives. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like sabotage. It feels like clarity. I've been pushing too hard. I need to recover before I burn out. I'll restart Monday and do this properly. I don't want to build on a bad foundation. Something about this approach feels off. I should take a step back and rethink. These thoughts feel like self-awareness. Sometimes they are. But there's a difference between wisdom and interference, and it lives in the timing. Wisdom tends to arrive when you're genuinely stuck. When you've hit a real wall and the path forward requires something different. Interference tends to arrive when you're gaining traction. When something is starting to work and the old identity can feel the distance growing. When things start working is often precisely when the resistance intensifies. Not because you're doing something wrong. Because you're getting close to something that matters. It shows up in relationships the same way, which is worth staying with for a moment because this is where the pattern becomes hardest to see. A man starts to become more honest with his partner. He stops deflecting. He says something true, something that costs him, that leaves him slightly exposed. And it lands. The conversation goes somewhere real. He feels a kind of connection he hasn't felt in a long time. Then the next night he shuts down completely. He doesn't know why. He tells himself he's tired. He tells himself the moment has passed, or that she wouldn't understand, or that it wasn't that important anyway. He retreats into familiar distance. It's not because he doesn't want connection. It's because the connection was real, and real connection raises real stakes. If he stays closed, he can't be genuinely hurt. If he stays behind the glass, he can move through his relationships without being fully inside them. The mind manufactures emotional numbness to manage emotional risk. And the cost of that protection accumulates so slowly over so many years that most men stop being able to feel the difference between emotional unavailability and simply being the kind of man they are. That distinction matters. Most men assume the solution to all of this is more effort, more structure, a better system, a stronger version of the same willpower that has already failed. But the patterns described in this video aren't discipline failures. They're protection strategies that have outlived their usefulness, which means the approach that actually works is different. The first shift is to stop reading resistance as evidence that you're doing something wrong. Most men treat internal resistance as a signal. This isn't right, this isn't the time, I'm not ready. But often, resistance is simply what it feels like to move into territory you haven't occupied before. The discomfort isn't a warning. It's the sensation of change. The second is to pay attention to when the resistance arrives. If the rationalizations, the sudden fatigue, the loss of momentum, if they consistently appear right as something starts to work, that timing is data. It's telling you that you're close to something the older version of you doesn't want you to reach. The third shift is harder and slower. Start asking, with genuine curiosity rather than judgment, what you've been getting from staying still. Because staying still is never passive. There are always payoffs. The comfort of the familiar, the story of potential preserved, the avoidance of a failure that would be real rather than hypothetical. These payoffs are real. Your mind chose them for a reason. You can't move past them without first seeing them clearly. There's a version of you who has watched the better version of you start and stop many times. He's not hopeless. He hasn't given up. But he senses, without being quite able to name it, that the problem was never discipline, was never the right system or the right moment. The problem is that he's been asking himself to change, without ever asking what changing would actually threaten. That question, what am I protecting by staying exactly here, doesn't resolve anything on its own, but it reorients everything. It takes the problem from a failure of will to a matter of understanding. And those require completely different responses. There's something worth naming about the mind that attacks its own progress. It isn't self-destructive. It's self-protective, defending an older version of you that may have genuinely needed those defenses once. A version of you that learned at some point that change was dangerous, or that being seen fully was a risk, or that wanting things openly and not getting them was worse than never wanting them at all. That version of you was doing his best with what he knew. The work isn't to override him with willpower. It's to give him new information. To help him understand, slowly, that the territory ahead is safer than it looks. That who you're becoming doesn't erase who you were. That the threat he's been guarding against, the one that made all of this feel necessary, may not be real anymore. That takes time. But you can't start that conversation until you understand what the conversation is actually about. Now you do. If something in this video names something you felt but haven't been able to articulate, sit with it. Not the insight. The question underneath it. What have you been protecting by not moving? That answer, when it arrives honestly, is worth more than any plan.